A literal reading of the Genesis account of creation on day 6 of God's creative week shows numerous errors against what we know from modern scientific research. Land animals, including early tetrapods, classic dinosaurs, mammals, and insects, are separated evolutionarily by hundreds of millions of years. Human beings are a late arrival on the scene of Earth's history, and they alone domesticated animals, like cows, the sheep, and goats. Such animals are not the result of spontaneous creation, either by the divine spoken word, as the biblical narrative suggests, or by natural selection. Quite simply, the author of the first book of Genesis could not have gotten more of his facts and details wrong in his story of creation. But as we've seen, this dismal failure of the biblical creation story has not stopped some from trying to rewrite and reinterpret its tale. Andrew Parker, author of The Genesis Enigma, skips detailing the sixth day of creation in his book, having already brought land animals onto the scene with the evolution of other creatures. He merely notes in passing that evolution's last great experiment was to bring human beings onto the planet, and this parallels Genesis's account of humanity being the last of God's creations. Gerald Schroeder's take, however, is to place in day 6 not the creation of the first animals to creep up onto the land, but instead the mass extinction of the dinosaurs and 90% of all other land creatures 65 million years ago, and the subsequent tens of millions of years history of the eventual repopulation of the earth by mammals and the slow evolution of hominids, and finally of human beings. Of course, neither of these so-called interpretations of the last day of creation actually line up with the biblical account, except extremely superficially. Since evolution is not a process that has a goal or an end for which it aims, it can hardly be equated with the clear biblical intention of making the creation of human beings the final crowning achievement of God's work. And if Genesis is interpreted loosely enough, pretty much anything can be fit into the story. Other creationists, however, still try to line the biblical story up with modern scientific discoveries.
And guys, we're going to talk about when man was created, day 6. Let me read the record and let's find out if the Bible and science square up. Okay, the account says 3 specific kinds of land mammals are made here. Talk about what that is scientifically.
Yeah, this is different from the 5th creation day where it addresses birds generically and sea mammals generically. The 6th creation day talks about 3 specialized kinds of land mammals. Land mammals that God creates to cohabit the planet with the future human beings. And 2 kinds are long-legged and 1 kind is short-legged. The short-legged ones, the ones that are built close to the ground, I think are referring to rodents and rabbits, maybe other creatures with short legs. And the long-legged ones we note are in 2 categories. There's the wild, and then there's the bioma, which I think is reference to the herbivores, which are relatively easy for human beings to tame. And then the wild animals, I think, is a reference to the carnivores, although difficult to tame, make excellent household pets, whereas the herbivores do not make good household pets.
In the preceding clip, creationist Hugh Ross makes a number of unsupported assertions regarding his interpretation of the Genesis creation account of day 6. First of all, he assumes that the creatures created this day were all mammals. There is certainly no reason to make this assumption. Indeed, no other land animals had been created prior, and no other land animals will be mentioned later in the narrative. Thus, all land animals must be assumed to have been created on day 6 of the Genesis story. That would include mammals, but also marsupials, reptiles, and insects. Ross apparently assumes the Hebrew word translated creeping things in the King James Version of the Bible, remes, refers to short-legged mammals like rodents and rabbits. But there certainly is nothing in the text to suggest such a distinction. In fact, the word remes is used almost exclusively in Genesis, and Strong's assumes it refers to reptiles, or any land animals. Ross then assumes that the Genesis text separates the creation of carnivores from herbivores. But this still doesn't get the Genesis narrative away from asserting the creation of domesticated creatures before the formation of human beings. Were cows, goats, and sheep originally created as wild and included in the same category as perpetually wild herbivores in the Genesis narrative? If so, Why is the same word exclusively used for livestock later in the Bible used in Genesis to refer to any plant-eating mammal, with the exception of Ross's small-legged herbivores, which he believes were distinguished earlier? And why differentiate between long-legged carnivores and herbivores, but not between short-legged carnivores and herbivores? Clearly, Ross is trying to force a reading onto the book of Genesis that the original narrative does not suggest. Nevertheless, these creationists go on to discuss the formation of humankind.
All right, Fuzz, let me come to you. The fact is the Bible says God created man, okay? What's the parameters from the biblical genealogies? What's the longest space of time where we've got to say, that's it, we can't go any further than that? And then compare that with science. What are the parameters there for the science area? Where does man show up?
From the genealogies, you can infer roughly anywhere from 10,000 years ago to probably 100,000 years ago. That's the window. The most likely time frame would be in the 40, 50, 60,000 year window. From genetic studies of modern human populations, we see a date for the origin of man in the neighborhood of 50,000 years ago. The archaeological record shows a sudden burst of human culture at that same time frame as well. So the scientific evidence is fully compatible with what the Bible teaches about the origin of man.
The emergence of Homo sapiens did not coincide with an immediate emergence of human culture. The first cave paintings indicating the culture creationist Fazil Reyna suggests are 20,000 years younger than the migration of modern humans onto the European continent. However, neither this migration or the cave paintings mark the evolutionary emergence of Homo sapiens. That had come some 180,000 years earlier, and not from a garden at one end of the Near East's Fertile Crescent, as the Bible tells the tale, but from deep in the continent of Africa. Reyna refers to genetic research for the emergence of modern humans, but what does the science really tell us?
At some point in the past, a subgroup of Africans left the African continent to go out and populate the rest of the world. Now, how recently do we share this ancestry? Was it millions of years ago? Which we might suspect by looking at all this incredible variation around the world. No, the DNA tells a story that's very clear. Within the last 200,000 years, we all share an ancestor, a single person, mitochondrial Eve, you might have heard about her, in Africa. An African woman who gave rise to all the mitochondrial diversity in the world today. But what's even more amazing is that if you look at the Y chromosome side, the male side of the story, the Y chromosome Adam only lived around 60,000 years ago. That's only about 2,000 human generations, the blink of an eye in an evolutionary sense. That tells us we were all still living in Africa at that time. This was an African man who gave rise to all the Y chromosome diversity around the world. It's only within the last 60,000 years that we have started to generate this incredible diversity we see around the world. Such an amazing story. We're all effectively part of an extended African family.
So, what the creationist in the earlier clip didn't understand was that all modern humans share a common ancestor with a single female who lived some 200,000 years ago. The single male ancestor, however, lived roughly 60,000 years ago, and both came from Africa. The group which would carry these DNA markers had not yet left their ancestral homeland to move out onto the European and Asian continents. This hardly aligns with the biblical story unless you deliberately leave important details out of your reinterpretation of the science. And also, as these creationists fail to mention, it is with this same genetic evidence they cite for the emergence of modern Homo sapiens that links us evolutionarily most closely with modern chimpanzees and other apes, and indeed, ultimately, with all life on Earth. Human beings were not a special creation. In fact, were we to roll back time and eliminate the cosmic accident which wiped out the dinosaurs, human beings may very well never have evolved. Our place on this planet was never a guarantee. As a side note, how are these creationists reaching the conclusion that the Bible's genealogies can date the creation of man, as described in the Genesis narrative, to roughly the same time as has been discovered by modern science? They, of course, do not say. The most famous dating of events from the genealogies of the Bible was done by the Church of Ireland's Archbishop James Ussher in 1650. He calculated that creation began at nightfall preceding the 26th of October, 4004 BCE, and this has been the standard by which creationists, interested in a literal reading of the Bible, have dated the creation. Without a detailed account of how creationists like Reina used the biblical genealogies, we can hardly make comment on how accurate it may be with modern scientific discoveries. But dating aside, Homo sapiens did not appear on Earth one day, as the Bible clearly states. Homo sapiens are a species from a long, bushy evolutionary lineage. From prior species, a Homo sapiens couple did not suddenly appear one day. In the scientific story of Y-chromosomal Adam and mitochondrial Eve, our genetic parents do not live together in a cozy garden, but are separated from one another by nearly 150,000 years. So, no matter where some turn for help in trying to reconcile the biblical account of creation, as narrated in the first book of Genesis, with the discoveries of modern science, they meet with failure. There simply is nothing regarding the formation of our universe, the earth, and life that Genesis got right.